Good day, my name is Michael, and today I will be teaching the ACT writing and reading portion. So our first question is from the reading section. Here we have a short passage. So the way to approach these questions is, in my opinion, always don't read the actual passage, counterintuitive though that might be. What you need to do is you want to go straight to the question itself, because that will tell you what you need to look for in the passage. Since we're under a time constraint within the ACT's testing system, you have to be able to use your time efficiently. And this is the best way to do that. So, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? We're looking at a main purpose type question. The way to approach these is you want to go to the end of the passage, because generally the way a passage works is the opening line will be some introduction, some context, and then the main purpose will be towards the end. So you want to read the last sentence, which in this case, we're discussing The Wizard of Oz. You should be familiar with this very famous book and very famous movie. So in order to tackle this problem, we'll be going to the last sentence, and you'll be able to see. So she was surprised, of course, but when she found she had been picked up by a cyclone, Dorothy had made up her mind to go with it and not be frightened. The part of underlined will be the key words. Generally, you want to keep an eye out for any types of verbs or adjectives. In this case, surprised, made up her mind, not be frightened. So we already get an idea that, okay, this is kind of what the passage wants us to take away. This is the main idea. With that in mind, we'll be able to then look at the answers and apply the scientific method. We'll check each answer choice to make sure that it's incorrect or correct. So the way you want to view that is there are some answer choices which will be kind of right, but those ones are mostly there to just trap you, because within the ACT there's only one right answer, and that's the one that's the most accurate. We'll explain what that means with these examples. A, to show that Dorothy is unafraid despite her unusual circumstances. Okay, we can see not frightened, unafraid, despite her unusual circumstances. So we know that she's surprised because it's something that's not quite the norm. So this one's looking quite good. We'll keep an eye on this one. B, to explain how Dorothy arrived in the land of Oz. So the only part of this entire passage which refers to how Dorothy arrived is this singular line, which, as you can probably guess, because it's near the beginning and it's not something that's elaborated upon, this probably isn't the answer. There's just not enough within the passage that directs your attention towards it. C, to demonstrate that Dorothy misses her home and family. Okay, that's not mentioned whatsoever, so you know that C is wrong. D, to suggest that Dorothy is confused by what has happened to her. So this is one that seems kind of correct, because we can tell that she's surprised. However, as you can kind of tell, the following lines are all about her attitude, how she feels about it, and what her decisions are, which means that this one leaves out a big chunk of important information. So while this one is kind of correct, A is more correct, because every part of A is represented within the passage. So that's how you know to choose A. Question 2, more reading. So, as always, don't waste time reading the passage. Go to the answer first. Well, go to the question first. So, which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? Structured questions are a bit common, and they're a bit more difficult. Mostly because with structure, you do have to read the entire passage to get an understanding of how it's set up. The easiest way to do this is to skim read and look for the punctuation marks. Because these passages tend to be somewhat short, at least, that means you can save time while still getting an overall idea of how the passage flows. So the way we do this is we'll just skim through, reading quickly. In his essay, philosopher Walter Benjamin lamented decline of oral storytelling, rising popularity of the novel. Okay, that's our first full stop. For Benjamin, the novel represented a mode of communication that was fundamentally isolating, streamed the solitary reader consuming story in private. Okay, stop. In contrast, Benjamin saw the oral storytelling as a communal art form that fostered a sense of shared experience and collective. Okay, so we have 3 sentences, and we can kind of tell as we skimmed through it what each sentence is about, right? How do you know what it's about? Well, obviously you look for the verbs. Verbs tell you what's happening within the sentence. So there's something that you should always keep an eye on. In the first sentence, we have lamented the decline of oral storytelling. Okay, in the face of the novel. So we have somebody discussing or lamenting, they're feeling bad about the situation, they feel sad about it. For Benjamin, the novel represented, he's discussing what the novel is. As it assumed, the solitary reader continuing the story in private. In contrast, so here we know whatever this is about, it has to be the opposite of what the novel is. So oral storytelling as a communal art form that fostered a sense of shared, so without even spending that much time reading deeply, we can already get a sense of what the passage is about, right? We can tell that it's about oral storytelling is better than the novel because of a shared experience. So with that in mind, we can now look at the answers and choose the one that most fits the structure we just discussed. So it examines a cultural shift, then predicts its long-term effects. So we know that it does examine the cultural shift from the oral storytelling to the novel. However, it doesn't predict the long-term effects. Therefore, A can't be the answer. It describes an artistic movement, then explains its social implications. Perhaps it's not completely wrong. It does talk about the effect that the shift away from oral storytelling had, but it's not quite right either, is it? Because we don't really get an explanation of the social impact. For C, it presents a claim, then details a distinction that the claim is based on. So at first glance, this might not seem like the answer because it doesn't use the vocabulary or vernacular that we see within the passage, right? We don't have things like culture or artistic. But if you examine what it's actually saying, we're discussing structure. So these are the parts that are independent of the actual content of the passage, which in this case means it presents a claim, the claim, we have the decline, then details a distinction that the claim is based upon. Well, as we said earlier, in contrast, we can tell that there's a distinction between these two, there's a difference. And it's specifically what Benjamin is discussing. It's about how oral storytelling is different from the novel. So C is looking quite good. D highlights a philosophical argument, then refutes it with a counterpoint. This one might seem like the answer because, again, it uses refute, which in your mind you should connect to, well, in contrast, it's arguing against something. However, the issue is a philosophical argument. While depending on how metaphysical you want to get, everything can be philosophical. Within the context of the passage, he's discussing his observation on this trend as a fact. He's not sort of discussing its philosophical implications. Therefore, it's not really applicable here to say that it's a philosophical argument. Furthermore, he's not actually refuting the argument which is made here. He's refuting this point, which is an explanation. Therefore, it can't be D. So between B and C, as we discussed, C is much stronger. Therefore, the answer has to be C. Question 3. We move on to writing sections. These sections will be more about grammar, rules, the standard conventions of English. Now, because standard convention is a bit of a tricky thing to nail down, you have to understand that it's an allowance. That means that we will be using some of the common lexicon, some of the non-formal English. However, we will still be abiding by the official rules of grammar. So you'll see things which might sound correct, but you have to keep in mind, is it actually correct if you go down to the nitty details? We'll start with a bit of a more complicated example to illustrate. With writing, you can go straight to the question as we did with reading. However, you're not really saving as much time because whenever you get a writing question, you'll see conventions of standard English. Okay, we're dealing with grammar, we're dealing with rules. So, what's the first place you should go to then? Oh, go straight to the blank. And the reason you do that is because when you read before and after the blank, you'll understand the context, which means that you now know what grammar rule is supposed to be used here. This one, however, is a bit tricky because before and after is quite a long sentence. So you'll have to read all of this. Renowned historian Jane Thompson finds that the process of digging through archival materials to uncover lost stories, blank, deeply satisfying in itself, comma, archaeologists often prefer the seemingly strenuous work of excavation to other tasks. So, a lot of big words, it can sound a bit confusing. Stop, break it down into its grammatic parts. What's that mean? We're looking for sentences, and we're checking if the sentence is a fragment or a clause. Fragment is a part of a sentence. It means that it doesn't have the necessary components of subject verb. A clause is a complete sentence. It's a sentence that has the subject and verb properly conjugated. To contrast, the boy running with the ball, that's a fragment. The boy ran with the ball, that's a clause. So, within this, let's isolate. Renowned historian Jane Thompson finds that, hold up here, we have a conjunction. Conjunctions can only be applied between two full sentences, right? Between two clauses. Jane Thompson finds, well, that's a clause. So we're going to cut this off here. This part is complete, it's grammatically correct. We don't need to think about it. So let's see this next bit. The process of digging through archival materials to uncover lost stories, blank, deeply satisfying in itself. Comma. Okay, hold up here. With this comma, we have to think, if this was a full sentence, then this would be a comma splice, which is what happens when you take two clauses and connect them not with a conjunction, but with a comma. That's incorrect. However, since we know that the sentence after that is a full clause, whatever comes before can't be a clause, right? Because that's not the bit the part before is what we're editing. That's what we're working with. So, if this is a clause, this cannot be a clause. So what's left? Is there a fragment? Well, let's take a look. The process of digging through archival materials, deeply satisfying. So let's ignore all that. This is all describing the process. What we're actually looking for is, it's a positive, as we say. So the process, blank, deeply satisfying in itself. So let's think about what our options are here. The process being deeply satisfying in itself, possibly functions, but not really, because the process being deeply satisfying in itself, archaeologists often prefer the seemingly strenuous work of excavation. So that works, right? Why does it work? Because it transforms this whole section into a participle phrase. That is to say, a sentence which is a modifier upon the word archaeologists. If you look at the other examples, the process to be deeply satisfying in itself, archaeologists often prefer the seemingly strenuous work. Maybe. It doesn't really work though, right? Grammatically speaking. The process was, okay, that conjugates the verb. That means that this is one full sentence. Incorrect. The process is, same issue. So B and C are out. If we're stuck between A and D, the issue with A is the process to be deeply satisfying in itself. That doesn't work as a participle phrase, which is the only way that this whole thing can make sense. Therefore, it has to be D. So, our final question for today is another writing question. You can tell it's writing because when you go straight to the question itself, conventions of standard English. So, we're dealing with grammar. That means that we go straight to the blank, read before and after to get an understanding of the sentence. However, unfortunately here, we've got, here's the full stop, here's the capital. Okay, all of this is one sentence. We get unlucky sometimes like that. However, there's still a way to save time on questions like this, and that's that when you skim, be aware of what you're skipping over to understand the context of what it is. To give an example, all of this is it's 2 and a bit lines. That's a lot of time spent reading. However, if you just skim over it and realize, okay, all of this is just a bunch of capital letters, all of this together is one singular they. It's just describing who the they is. So we've saved time. They are among the many institutions globally committed to preserving significant artifacts of aviation exploration. Okay, so they're doing all this. Here's a comma. Pay attention to punctuation when you're dealing with grammar. Comma, such as, okay, we've got an explanation, we've got a comparison. That means that we've got a list coming. So what do we have here? The Space Shuttle Discovery, semicolon. Okay, hold up. The semicolon can be used to either conjoin sentences, in which case we're conjoining 2 full clauses, or it can be used in replacement of the more traditional comma when we're dealing with a complicated list, which here we have. The Space Shuttle Discovery, okay, that seems simple, but what's next? Promoting scientific blank and informing the public about the history and advancements in aerospace technology. Okay, so what has to go in here? Well, promoting scientific discovery, and we know that, okay, there has to be some form of punctuation here because we've got a list. What does a list need? 3 or more items. That's the only way it's a list. So this has to be the second item in the list, right? Which means that whatever's here has to be a semicolon because that's how you keep the list consistent. And you know that that's the end because what's the last item in the list? It's introduced with and. So let's look at the answer choices. Inquiry, comma, and no, we used a semicolon at the start of the list. We have to continue using semicolons. Inquiry, blank, no, we need punctuation. Inquiry, semicolon, boom, here's our friend. And just to be thorough, you check the last one. Inquiry, colon, well, as we discussed, it's a list. You need semicolons, can't be D. So that's why the answer is C. So thank you for coming to today's lesson. My name has been Michael, and it's been a lovely time. I hope to see you in our next class.